The lady from Ramsey, Representative Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I want to talk a little bit about the racial equity part of the bill. And I talked to Chair Garofalo about this in committee. And so I just want to remind the body that in 2015, the household incomes for blacks in Minnesota plummet in the past year, in 2014, according to a survey that was released by the U.S. Census Bureau. From 2013 to 2014, the median income for black households in the state fell by 14%. In constant dollars, that was a decline from about $31,500 to $27,000. And that's about $4,500. Meanwhile, the statewide poverty rate for black residents rose from 33% to 38%, compared to the stable overall state poverty rate of 11%. The median black household in Minnesota is now worse off than in counterparts like Mississippi. We are worse than Mississippi. Among the 50 states, along with Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., Minnesota ranked 45th in median black household income. Mississippi ranked 44th. And I mention that because I just want to take us back to that horrible, horrible news that we heard about black wages plummeting in our state. And so when I look at this bill, I say that, this bill go back on Minnesota promise, a promise to fix racial economic disparities. Last year, the legislature passed Governor's Dayton Equity Initiative to combat racial economic disparities. Now, we have the Republicans who are cutting and shifting money away from these efforts that ensures opportunities for all Minnesotans. The House Omnibus Job Bill eliminates individual funding for 7 of the 2016 equity grant programs. And instead, it gives an appropriation of $10 million for the fall 18-19 biennium to these existing Pathway to Poverty grant program. With possible purposes of the Pathway of Prosperity grant, the individually defunded equity grant program. So my concern is that the $10 million new bundle grant program is $4.5 million less than the funded appropriated in the 2016 legislation session with those 7 programs that it eliminated. That's one of my concerns. My second concern is that the Omnibus Job Bill language also states that grants made under this clause must focus on low-income community, young adults for families with a history of intergenerational poverty, and communities of color. And I thank you for that language. I think that is really good, strong language. But what it also do is leave out women who would not be included as a focus for this bundle grant program. So why is that important? It's important because the high wage, high demand, non-traditional jobs for the women grant program that was originally a part of the 2014 Women Economic Security Act that we passed a couple of years ago, sessions back. And last year, as part of the equity legislation, women and girls of color was added as a priority. And the Emerging Entrepreneur Grant Program, which provides small business loans to businesses owned by minority and low-income persons, women and veterans, and people with disabilities, is no longer a priority. My concern is that by not including women as a mandatory focus with the two programs above, it would be at a disadvantage in receiving funding under the new proposed Bundled Pathway to Prosperity Grant Program. And that is important, that that language around women is added. And I tell you another reason why that's important. Because the one thing we know is that Minnesota women of color are strong, resilient, and dedicated to their families and community, and they are an essential part of Minnesota economic and social fabric. They are robust. We are a robust participant in the labor force. 75% of Hmong, African Americans, and African immigrant mothers with young children are in the labor force. They are in the labor force. 65% of Mexican mothers and 62% of Minnesota Somali women aged 16 plus are all in the labor force. They are the primary breadwinners in their family. 80% of Minnesota Native Americans, African Americans, and African immigrant women with children earn the majority of the family income. They are small business owners. 1 in 3 women-owned business in the U.S. is owned by women of color. African American women own almost half of all of African American owned businesses. 37% of Minnesota Somali entrepreneurs are women, whereas only 22% of our state non-migrant entrepreneurs are women. Yet, women and girls of color face significant challenges and disparities. So what are they? Well, let's start with the fact that Minnesota African Americans and African immigrants, we only earn 62 cents to the dollar compared to the dollar that a white man earned. We only earn 62 cents to the dollar. Hispanic women, on the other side, only earns 57 cents to the dollar compared to a white man. 57 cents. There's no reason for that to be, but it is. And to be clear, Somali women who earns 54 for every $1 that a white male earns. A Hispanic woman working full-time stand to lose about $854,000 over the course of her career because of the gender wage gap. The median earnings of Minnesota's African American and African immigrant women declined by $4,697 in 2013 to 2014. And over 64% of Minnesota African American and African immigrant female-headed households with young children are living in poverty. And they're living in poverty not because they're not working. They're in the workforce. They are the breadwinners. And so when I look at this jobs bill and I look at what is missing and why it's important to add one little word like women and girls of color as a priority, is that we are hardworking people in the workforce. We are entrepreneurs, small business owners. But yet at the rate that we are paying women, it's shameful. It is shameful that we're not making a dollar for a dollar, and we should. So when we look at these equity dollars and the dollars that was given directly to communities who are doing great work in the community, that was intentional work that came from the community, that came with legislators of color working in partnership, making sure their records, their financial was in part because we want to make sure that the money that we give to communities, that we're going to get results from those money, and we're not wasting our dollars. That's important, that we're not wasting tax dollars, but you got to have faith to believe that communities know what is best for their communities and how to use those dollars. So I'm disappointed that we went back in and eliminated, and took back those possible dollars that they would have gotten in 18 and 19, because if we're going to really work on closing this racial economic gap that we have, one-time dollars is not going to do it. All the evidence and all the research tell us if you want to see a pattern of change, you have to wait 3+ years for that to happen. We can't keep switching things around, a little here and a little there. It doesn't have an impact, and it's not going to change anything. It takes 3+ years. And with the disparities we have in this state, it probably would take a little bit longer than that. So to go in and cut the dollars, I mean, $4.5 million is a lot of money in the life of someone who's working really hard and been underpaid. It's a lot, and it makes a difference. So my hope is that, as we take this bill into conference committee and we look at ways that we can do better by this bill, that one, with the Representative Garofalo yield to a question?
He will yield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Garofalo, I spoke to you about this, and it was a last minute. I didn't bring an amendment to the committee, but I tried to do an oral amendment. And one of the things that you said to me was that you will work with me on this language. And so, can you give me your thoughts on this now?
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Moran, so with regards to the changes we made in the equity funding, there is now a larger competitive grant program that actually has more resources available than before. In addition, the qualifying language to be eligible for those competitive grants incorporates all the language in the equity funding. I believe it was Monday, I forwarded you an email with that new language. If we have not addressed that concern, please let me know the amendment that the changes that need to be made and will be incorporated. Again, the intent, and I've reviewed the language and I believe it says this, is that the qualifications in the equity grants are what are applying to the new competitive grant program, so that when you have overlapping communities, instead of having to apply for 3 separate competitive grants and having 3 separate administrative staff support persons, by consolidating into a competitive grant program, we have more resources available, more resources for frontline services and less on the administrative back end. But again, if I'm wrong about that, just let me know where the language is and we'll fix it.
Representative Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Garofalo, thank you for that. I have not seen the email, and I would take a look. I would check my emails to confirm that. I appreciate the willingness to be open to make sure that we are doing our due diligence in this state and in this body to move communities forward, especially when this is a community of people who are in the workforce, who are working, who are small business owner, who are entrepreneur. And as you guys know, that when you invest in a small business hire people from the community, or in your instance, from your town, right? And so I would take a look in moving forward, and just hope that when this bill comes back, it can be a strong bill that really moves the state of Minnesota forward. Thank you.